So I met Magnus some years ago. We were together trying to find a better place, a better world. And here we are today. I mean, my name is Pablo Álvarez Funes. I am a Spanish architect based in London, where I have been living for 13 years. And I also, on top of... So yeah, I mean, I studied in southern Spain, in Sevilla, and I always wanted to do classical architecture, traditional architecture. You know, Spain is full of beautiful architecture, but I never could. I mean, all of my professors were always telling me, no, you have to build modernist, this is our time, it's a phase, you can't dedicate to restoration. And then eventually I started to discover a network and a series of people who actually do beautiful architecture, that work on this. And that's something very inspiring, because as Magnus was saying, it brings your roots, it brings your identity back, and it contributes you to create a better world, inspired in your surrounding, inspired in what it really makes you yourself. And in this case, what makes Norwegian architecture properly Norwegian, or what makes a Spanish architecture properly Spanish. No, and this is something that we are going to talk a little bit now about how all this has been like flattened by modernism, and that the dream of modernism has produced monsters. No, we are all used to say, I don't like all these ugly buildings. I think that you have had here in Oslo a bit of a massive polemic with a new museum that has been done quite close to here. There is always polemics with modernist buildings. They say that they're going to be cheap, they're more expensive than they actually are. So we all have all these type of problems, and what we normally get told is that there is nothing you can do about it. And what I want to talk to you today is actually that yes, you can do things against. If you don't like the buildings, if you don't like modern architecture, there is an alternative. You can build things as they were. That doesn't mean that we're going to build, to go back and build and live in a farm and plow the land with a couple of oxes. Well, if you want to, organic farming is also an option, but that doesn't mean that looking to the past means accepting the whole past. You can take from the past whatever you like, the same way that a moment ago we were playing Beethoven, and that's okay, no? And we don't need to be playing only what was composed yesterday. The same way, we don't need to be building only architecture that it has rebelled to be like annoying, that it alienates us, if we want to use that terminology, and that creates, doesn't create links to the society. When you see people who live in a modernist block of 10,000 units, or maybe 10,000 is too much, like several hundreds units, do you know your neighbors? Do you know the people who live around? But now, if you live in a more traditional neighborhood, you know everyone. Doesn't mean that you live all in individual houses. I mean, if the density is the right density, you have a knowledge of your people, and then you worry about your community. Because one of the problems that modernist architecture has is that people get very quickly detached from it because it doesn't create a community, and the community is the most important thing, is the blood that makes the circulation of the city work. If you don't have a community, if you don't have people around you whom you care and who care for you, then you don't care about the architecture. It's like you see all the typical theory of the broken car. Have you heard about that one? That if you leave an abandoned car in a community neighborhood, then the car will stay like that for a long time, and eventually someone will call the police to take it out. If you leave it in a rundown neighborhood, after one day they will start sucking the car, and eventually the car disappears because it has been broken into pieces. So that's a bit what happens with a building. If you worry about the beauty of the building stays. We are in a very beautiful building, and people make an effort of keeping it. If you don't like the building where you live, people, the window is broken, I don't care. This is broken, you don't care. So that's a bit the essence of what we are talking about, and what I wanted to, here we are, and what I wanted to bring here. So I have subtitled this. I mean, many of you, I know that all of you have came for the title, What Do I Need to Know to Build a Beautiful City? We're going to talk about that, but also we're going to talk about things you always wanted to know about beautiful architecture but we're afraid to ask. Some of you may get where this is coming from. And this is what I was saying a moment ago. The dream of modernity has produced monsters. This is the only Spanish thing you're going to see in this lecture. I mean, this is an engraving from Goya called The Dream of Reason Produces Monsters, and I have slightly edited it to call it The Dream of Modernity Produces Monsters. And the buildings that you see on the top, those are a plan for reconstructing Paris, according to an architect called Le Corbusier. A lot of people, you might know Le Corbusier, the super modernist, the cubist architect. The French, wasn't French, was Swiss architect. And he proposed a plan to demolish the whole city of Paris and substitute it with those blocks. And when you analyze it, I mean, the area he was destroying was bigger than most of the areas bombed by the Germans or bombed by the Allies to the Germans. So he was an area bigger than Dresden and an area similar to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So he was actually destroying the whole city of Paris. And thanks God, this never happened, but eventually other people followed. And the building you see at the bottom was one famous building called Prut Ego by an architect called Minoru Yamasaki, the architect of the Twin Towers. This building was done in the 50s, and in the 70s it had to be demolished. It had become the most unsafe part of the city. Completely unsafe, and because people didn't love that neighborhood. So now, 25 years into the 21st century, we are told, we know, we have the evidence that the dream of modernity has produced monsters. We need to deal with them. A lot of them are being demolished and replaced. Others, they are there, like the elephants in the room. And we are told at the same time that the only thing we have to do is just like this image, which is it's a drawing from the 18th century called The Despair of the Artist at the Contemplation of the Ruins from Antiquity by Henry Fuseli. And the massive foot and the massive finger that you see there are two portions of a Roman sculpture that you can see in the Campidoglio in Rome. And basically he's portraiting here like the angst that you have, that you cannot even get closer to Roman architecture. And this is basically the maximum you can get when you say at university that, oh, I want to build classical, I want to build traditional. The only thing you can do is look at the ruins and cry. And I say, no, I don't want to cry, I want to create. There is always time to cry, and as my mom used to say, never cry, cry only when I die. So that's what everyone should do. So there is no despair. And if I show you this image, you may think, oh, this is very beautiful, I like it. This is an old city. Is it old? How old do you think these buildings are? Say 1 year. It looks restored, but it's not restored. These buildings are from 10 years ago. So we can do this architecture nowadays. If you like this architecture and you feel that this is going to contribute to create a better community, this can be done. And that's what we're going to be talking for a little while today. And now for the next part of the lecture, I want your collaboration. We're going to play. We're going to play a little game. I'm going to show you some images, and I want you to tell me from the bottom of your heart if what you see is classical architecture or no. The only thing you can say, you can just keep it for yourself, but think if it is yes or no. No if, no but, oh, I have seen this building in a book. No. If your heart is telling you, and then we're going to see what your heart is telling you about the images. So it's going to be 5-10 seconds per image, very quick. So this one, do you think this is classical, yes or no? Yes. This one? Yes. This one? Okay. What about this one? Yes. And this one? Yes. Ooh. What about this one? Yes. And this one? Yes. What about this one? Yes or no? And this one? And what about this one? Oh, okay. And what about this one? No, why not? This is a new building don't actually close to Paris, in Val d'Europe, close to the Euro Disney Park. So this is one of a good example of contemporary classical architecture. And here you have, in case you are interested, and I can always send you the presentation, this is all the buildings that you see is a mix of buildings from all over the world. Now, a lot of you have said that certain buildings are classical and others not. And the most of you who have said no to certain buildings and yes to others, you have been using classical with uppercase C. The ones who have had a wider view and have said yes to almost everything have a classical with lowercase. And it's not a problem upper or lowercase. Classical with lowercase means the typical expression of any given culture. So that way you have classical Mayan architecture, which is the Mesoamerican building you saw, classical Chinese architecture, classical rock, classical heavy metal, classical music. And then you have classical with uppercase C. And with uppercase C, classical applied to architecture means an architecture that was originated in Greece and Rome and then continues to our days. So it's a very wide spectrum. I'm going to talk a moment about it. And of course, we're in music, and when you apply classical music with uppercase C, is classical from Mozart, Beethoven, the central years of 18th century. So we have a classical with lowercase in a wider spectrum, and classical with uppercase to signify a specific period. And obviously, I mean, when we're talking about Western architecture, that's it. And why classical architecture with uppercase C is only referred to the Western? Because classical Western architecture is the only one that has a universal vocation. All other architectural expressions, they are very, very well adapted to their terrains. They are extremely well adapted, but they don't go out of their terrain. Classical architecture is the only one which went outside the ethnic limits of Greece, because the Doric order was for the Dorians, the Ionic for the Ionians, the Corinthian for the people from Corinth, to express an architecture for all people and for all nations. And that's why here, we're in Norway, in a beautiful hall surrounded by Corinthian columns, and not in a stave church, with all the respect to the beautiful stave churches that you have here in Norway, which are very interesting and have very interesting roots with what's happening here in pagan times. But also a very interesting link with late antiquity. So on that sense, I think there are three terms that you need to understand when we're talking about this type of architecture. We have traditional architecture, we have vernacular architecture, and we have classical architecture. So traditional architecture is the traditional expression of any given architecture. So that way you will have traditional Swedish architecture, traditional Norwegian, traditional architecture from North Norway or South Norway. And when we are talking about traditional architecture, we meet a series of common conditions. For example, there is more wall than openings. The walls are very thick. The roofs are sloped. It's giving us elements to protect us from the weather. Now, when we're talking about a specific region, that's vernacular architecture. And I'm not an expert on Norwegian architecture, but I'm sure that architecture in Tromsø will be different to the Trondheim, will be different to Bergen. There are always local differences. And of course, if you compare the typical Norwegian house with the typical house from southern Spain, there is a lot of difference. And when you analyze those differences, why? Because it's very cold in Norway, it's very hot in Spain. So you create your house to stay warm. We create our houses to stay cold. So you cannot build a traditional Spanish house here because you will die. And you do it in Spain, and then you build that. We call them ovens. So, and then classical architecture is an architecture, as I said, it's originated in the Mediterranean and expands to all over the world, adapting to the vernacular techniques. That's also one of the virtues of classical architecture. It has adapted to every single location. And you have Oslo as a beautiful example of that, and many others all over the world. And I'm bringing three examples. For example, you see this building. This building is in Africa. It's perfectly adapted to the weather conditions. You can see that, I mean, it has like a gallery around to ensure that the building is always in shade. It has a very, very interesting set of holes in the roof to ensure ventilation. And it works very well for that region. Bring it to here, to Norway. And what are you going to do there? It's going to be too cold all over the year. Not even the cattle would like to be there. But there it's perfect to live. So this is an example of vernacular architecture. Now you see this one, and automatically what you think about this image is like, oh, what is called here. You see very little openings, stone everywhere, which means very thick walls, a stone roof as well. So this is telling us that here you are, again, well, in the other building, you wanted all the air to circulate. In this one, you want the hot air to stay there, which is similar to the houses that you have here. So this is a good example of vernacular architecture. And of course, you see this and you know automatically that you're in the Middle East. And you see all these towers, oh, they look very picturesque, etc. These towers are called Bagdir, and they are a primitive AC system. Because these towers, each side is independent. Hot air is sucked from the outside by negative pressure, crosses all the whole underground of the house, and is blown elsewhere in the house, cold, because it has gone through wet areas. So for those of you who are engineers in the audience, that's how the AC works. So, and then you have here a wonderful example in Dubai about how to get a massive difference of 20 to 25 degrees. So if outside is 50, inside you're getting 30 degrees, which is quite good for summer in Dubai. But again, I mean, this has no use here in Norway. Why would you use this? I mean, what you need to do here is heat your house. And anything Norwegian will have no use there because it's the other way around. So that's why I mean that this architecture is perfectly tailored to its place, but cannot be away. Well, when you do classical, you can go everywhere with it. That's the universal value of classical architecture. And this is an example of a terrace house in London where the classical language is there, but it has been omitted for economy and for compositional purposes, a lot of the elements that you can see. So, said all this, we have been talking about classical, etc., but also about regional variations. Is classical architecture a style? Or are there different styles? No, because we can see how this building this hall is classical. We could even say that this hall is a variation on the Egyptian hall by Palladium. Not exactly, but it's more the Corinthian atrium that Palladium Vitruvius defined. And then all of a sudden, here we are in Oslo talking about a guy who lived in Rome 2,000 years ago, who didn't even know that Norway existed, or that there was something past the Rhine. So, and here you go, we are talking about his principles of architecture. And one thing that we need to bear in mind is that all civilizations have a characteristic architectural expression which is created in response to a series of climatic and cultural conditions. So, we are in Norway, we want our houses to be warm, so that's a must. And then what was once an answer to be satisfied then turns into a rule, and then the rule turns into art and beauty. That's why you have beautiful houses here in Norway that are perfectly adapted. Why? Because once you are sure that what you are building works, then you beautify it. Because why? Because human beings, we like beauty, and we like doing beautiful things, and we like ornament, because ornament makes us happy. And also ornament has a very important function, which we'll be talking in a moment. Some of you who are, if those of you who are architects here might recognize the image to the right is an allegory of the origins of architecture. And we can see architecture as a goddess who's carrying the compass, ordering Cupid to build a temple out of 3 branches and trunks. And there is a relationship between that structure arising from nature and the Parthenon, sorry. There is a relationship that transcribes the 3 trunks into columns and the beams into the entablature and the roof into the entablature. Why? Because classical architecture is nature tamed. The same way that ornament is one way that the human being that we have to show our dominion over nature, or our taming of nature. You see, for example, those beautiful curtains, they are inspired in William Morris. What are they? They are vegetation. They are a way of bringing nature to us, but a tamed nature. We don't want the birds to be annoying, or we don't want the birds to do birdy things, etc. around, so you have that. We don't want the flowers to get dry, and we don't want to get sad to see drying flowers. We have all the flowers always beautiful in there. So that's our way of taming nature and showing our dominion over nature. And when I say that classical architecture is a style, I mean it's the common trunk over which all the architectural styles in Europe are rooted, and by extensions all over the world. We have several branches. Bear in mind, this is an illustration from the 1890s, the tree of architecture, rooted into climate, geology, religion, society, history. And then the tree has several branches. And then you have a central branch, which is Greece. And from Greece, you go to Rome, Romanesque, Gothic, French. All the different variations of what you call styles are all rooted in classical architecture. We see this building. This would you call it neoclassical, but neoclassical. If you walk a bit up, and we're going to see some examples, you have the beautiful royal palace is neoclassical, while the parliament is neo-Romanesque. Romanesque meaning in the manner of the Romans. So it's an imitation of the Romans. That was what actually they were doing at the beginning of the Middle Ages. Any question until now? Why is classical architecture important? Because we're here talking about classical architecture and the importance of classical architecture. As I said, I mean, I'm repeating these images because allegories are important for us. In Western Europe, we have always reflected thoughts, feelings, ideas through allegories involving a combination of one or more figures that represent different things. So in this case, we see a goddess, the goddess of architecture, creating architecture. And we see that architecture, we have said, is emerged from the nature, is nature tamed. At the same time, this is another allegory about the learning of architecture. And we can see architecture carrying the compass with a little boy asking Athena, the goddess of wisdom, what can they do to learn more about architecture? And Athena is pointing out in a map, supported by Cupid and the history, pointing to Greece and Italy. But again, we know now that those origins of classical architecture, which are Greece and Italy, which are the Mediterranean, have transcended all those limits through Christianity. We have to say that Christianism expanded the classical architecture after the Renaissance, after the experiment in the Middle Ages, tried to find a proper Christian style. It emerged a completely classical to go back to the roots of the Mediterranean. And this wonderful tree of architecture, this wonderful multiplication of styles, is an architecture that has been created for all people and for all nations. Independently of what they are for, of what you are, when you build using the principles of classical architecture and you adapt them, and you adapt them to the local conditions, you get the most beautiful buildings. And this is something that has been happening, excepting in regions where there is a strong tradition, like China. The Chinese people, I always say the same. They invented anything, everything before everyone else, but they never wanted to expand. They were very happy within their limits, and they never wanted to expand that architecture, at the difference of Greece and Rome, who had a more universal vocation of expansion of those principles of equality and enlightenment of the human spirit through architecture. And I'm bringing here, of course, because you sometimes, when I speak in other countries, people say, oh no, but we don't have beautiful architecture. We don't have. Norway is a very interesting country because you are, at the same time, an old and a new country. So Norway in 19th century had a very interesting movement to see which was the typical Norwegian style. And I have brought, these two buildings, the Royal Palace and the Parliament, the two forces that balance the politics symbolically. I like that here in Oslo they are opposed one to each other more or less, so you have like both of them in constant dialogue. It doesn't matter if in constitutional terms it's not the same anymore, but I find it a very interesting metaphor. And you can see how on one side the Parliament was done in a medieval style to join and to root with the medieval institution of the testamental parliaments, while the monarchy, to represent its modernity, was built in neoclassical style. Also following racial theories of the time, who are saying that the Dorians were from, because we know that the Dorian invasions in Greece were from people from the north, who were actually blonde with blue eyes. That's what the ideal of the beautiful man, beautiful woman, blonde with blue eyes come, because they were the invaders who came to invade Greece, the Dorians. So during the 19th century, there was a theory that the Dorians were actually people from Germany, people from Norway, that through eventualities of history, they ended up invading Greece. So it was a way of rerouting and reconnecting all that in a very interesting way, because then, while other countries were indulging in a Baroque frenzy, all the northern countries were in a very strict neoclassical, trying to find their own route. So I find it very interesting, the evolution of the style of how Norway. So it's something that I encourage all of you as Norwegians to know more about the beautiful architecture in your country, because you have very beautiful buildings, and it's necessary that you know them to protect them and to want more of them, which is the important thing at the end of the day. And I'm bringing more here from the state churches, the Cathedral of Trondheim, which we could have another beautiful lecture about it. Bergen, with all the influences from the Hanseatic trade. You don't know if you're in Denmark, in Germany, or in Norway, and at the same time, you know that you are effectively there. So with all this, what I want to say is that one of these things that you need to know is your precedents. You need to know what you have around. And I love it, because it's what you have. It's what makes you special. Whether it is humble or not so humble, timber church, where it is a majestic Gothic cathedral that was practically rebuilt in 20th century, very, very interesting. And I don't know if many of you have, well, of course, all of you have heard about the golden ratio. Have you heard about the golden ratio? Well, the person who popularized the golden ratio was actually a Norwegian, Frederick Macodilland, because he was opposed to the restoration of the Cathedral of Nidaros, of Trondheim, and he wanted to do it in another way, and he invented the theory of the golden ratio to justify that. So very, very, very interesting in that sense. There were other people involved, but Frederick Macodilland, was one of the principal impulsors, because as nobody listened to him in Norway. They were promoting the other architect. He went all over the world to speak about it. So it's very interesting all of a sudden how, look, I mean, you were part of the wider history of classical architecture, not to mention the incredible restoration of the Cathedral of Trondheim, where they got very little, and then they didn't do any style restoration, they did a creative restoration, which is even more interesting what they ended up doing than what they initially wanted to do. So everyone could tell you that this is 14th century Gothic, and this is actually 20th century Gothic. There is almost nothing 14th century there, but it doesn't matter. It's equally beautiful, and that's what matters. Don't look about the age, look about the beauty. And then we're coming to the end. How can I know more? So I hope that you have enjoyed this class, and I would say that if you want to know more, it's reading more about classical architecture. You have a lot of, we live in an age which is at the same time global and local. So that means that you can hear about the beautiful buildings in Italy, but also you can read a very academic, beautiful article about this building, for example, or about the parliament, your parliament building. And that widens your perspective. You can see how important are all these things. Because we have came from a time in which we were obsessed with excellence. And by being obsessed with excellence, that meant that we didn't want to talk about things that were not so excellent. And then that allowed a lot of heritage to be destroyed because it was not excellent. If my model of excellence is the Royal Palace, anything that doesn't look like the Royal Palace doesn't count, let's demolish it. And nowadays, no, all these represent that we're very important people living here, it's part of our history, so that's important. That's thanks to reading and acknowledging the importance of architecture. You want to know more? This little book is very easy to read. I recommend everyone to purchase. It's very cheap to purchase. The Classical Language of Architecture by John Samuelson. You can get it online. It's available in archive.org, so it's no illegal download or anything, and you can buy it for less than £10. So it's a very, very good book. You can read it in a weekend to understand the beauty and the principle of classical architecture. You might have seen this one. If you see in any shop, that's a very good one, architectural theory, for you to understand the principles and of all this beautiful architecture that has been cementing all over the years. Virtual resources everywhere. I mean, I have put the ones I know, but I'm sure that here in Norway, you have a very beautiful national library and national archives that probably has a lot of information of buildings that you can check. So don't always go to the sources. Your governments spend a lot of money, I mean, in general, spend a lot of money in scan and digitalize the heritage. So don't go there, ask them, because they will be digitalized. And much more stuff. I always recommend to follow your local chapter of INBAU to know more about your area, or subscribe to the Classic Planning Institute, which is the institution where I'm coming from, for more information. We offer courses on classical architecture in case you're interested. This is what you will see when you are learning from us. So this is the drawing that I do during the classes. Stay tuned, because we're going to have an exhibition of all our students' work from the past years. I think that we have some students, some of my students are here, so thank you for coming. And that's all. I mean, I hope that you have enjoyed. We have also a Salon of Classical Architecture open to everyone. Every 2 weeks, our next session is the 10th of May. And here we talk about ideas and principles for you to understand more this beautiful architecture. And next week, we're going to talk about the staircases. So you're all welcome to come. And if you want to bring a project, an idea, we will be very happy to help you with it. And now, yes, thank you very much. And if you have any question that you don't want to ask now, you have there my email and my website if you want to ask. Thank you very much. Thank you, Magnus. Thank you.